Even though he was elected president in the late 60s, Richard Nixon is largely remembered for much of his presidency that took place in the early 70s. After taking office, President Nixon called for peace with honor in Vietnam, meaning that we had shown commitment. We'd been there for almost 20 years. There had been a lot of intensified fighting under his watch. There had even been secret bombings of Cambodia, a nation bordering Vietnam, and he finally called for peace with honor and a withdrawal. Nixon also reached out to communist nations like the Soviet Union and China to have better relations. This policy is a very important vocab term to know, is détente. Détente just means instead of having such adversarial relations with communist countries like the Soviet Union and China or Cuba, that we would have friendlier relations. Part of these friendlier relations successfully resulted in the Strategic Arms Limitation talks known as SALT. This is one of the biggest successes of détente, and the leadership of both the Soviet Union and the United States, so President Nixon and Soviet General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev, froze the number of strategic ballistic missile launchers at their existing levels, and no new weapons could be developed without the destruction of old weapons. And the destruction of old weapons is an extremely expensive process, so it more or less froze the production of nuclear weapons. Richard Nixon also created the Environmental Protection Agency. On July 9, 1970, this was created because there was a lot more conversation about protecting the environment after a famous 1962 book by Rachel Carson called Silent Spring, which really questioned U.S. environmental policies, and it brought up the topic of conversation really for the first time about like industrial waste, etc. And so the EPA was created in 1970, and this all happened via an executive order from President Nixon. You can see Rachel Carson and the cover of her book, Silent Spring, and then also the symbol of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Adding another layer to détente, Nixon visits China. To assure that the United States was sincere, he actually made a formal state visit. And you can see him here famously shaking the hand of Mao Zedong. The improved relations under Nixon allowed for a lot more improved trade with China as well. Perhaps what Nixon is most known for, however, is during his re-election campaign in 1972, 5 men were caught breaking into the Democratic Party national headquarters at the Watergate Hotel and Conference Center in Washington. They were wiretapping conference rooms and telephones and stealing campaign funds, cash funds. There was a very long investigation, and it included perjury, which is lying under oath, and obstruction of justice, intentionally misleading an official investigation in the Nixon administration. President Nixon himself resigned in August 1974 before he could be impeached, because it was discovered that he was on tape in the Oval Office talking about Watergate and how to cover up the crime. There's no real evidence that shows that President Nixon was directly involved in the actual crime that happened in June of 72, but that he was heavily involved in the attempted cover-up of the crime, which leads one to believe that what else was going on that was illegal and that he was possibly covering up. So in August of 1974, President Nixon resigned from office. And here is President Nixon boarding Marine One on his way to Air Force One as he left the White House for the last time. That's the end of the presentation on the Nixon presidency. Do you have any questions? Don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, I'll see you in class.